Welcome to Rock Center Shorts. My name is Kristen Savell. I'm Managing Director of the Rock Center for Corporate Governance at Stanford University. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest. Michelle Bond is an expert in securities, derivatives, banking, and fintech regulation, who is currently serving as CEO at the Association for Digital Asset Markets, or ADAM. Prior to joining ADAM, Michelle worked at two fintech companies and served as head of global regulatory affairs and public policy at Bloomberg LP. Michelle previously served as international counsel at the SEC and counsel to the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Michelle launched her legal career at the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority before practicing law at Hogan Lovells and WilmerHale. Thanks so much for joining us today, Michelle. Some folks in the audience might not be familiar with the Association for Digital Asset Markets. So can you start out by telling us what ADAM does and what prompted you to get involved with the association?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a pleasure to be here today. We're a trade association and we are also a standard setting body. So we are a member-based association of firms, and we have a mission, which is to advance market integrity in the space. So essentially, our founding members had gotten together in 2018. They all came from a traditional finance background, and they said, you know what we should do is devise a code of conduct for the crypto markets. And that code of conduct really sought to provide market standards and rules, essentially where the government and the federal standards were not present. So our code is very much in line, and it's more of an abbreviated version, I would say, of the global FX code. But we think that it gives market certainty. Certainly all of our members agree to adhere to the code of conduct. And I feel like it's a really great way for ADAM to be positioned, because, if there's ever to be a congressional approval for a self-regulatory organization, ADAM would be well placed to receive that designation, given that we are already advancing market integrity. We have a code of conduct, and that mission also, I would say, really puts us in a unique position to advance the policy discussion in Washington, which is something that we've really focused a lot on in the past year and a half. So we are also working very closely with policymakers and regulators to help develop a good public policy framework that works for crypto.
Right. And as we're talking about frameworks, there are lots of different ideas floating around about the best way to regulate digital assets, right? You can fold them into existing frameworks, create a new framework, give oversight to the SEC or the CFTC or a new regulator or a multi-agency task force, and that's just to name a few. So you mentioned self-regulatory organizations, or SROs. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and about ADAM's position on digital asset regulation?
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, there have been a whole variety of different proposals. The one area where I think the Republicans, the Democrats, the industry representatives are really starting to coalesce around is this idea of establishing an SRO, a self-regulatory authority that would work in conjunction with the regulators of primary jurisdiction to effectively I would say work on market integrity, consumer protection, and also just advance innovation in this country. This is obviously an idea that ADAM fully supports. We think an SRO would really strike the perfect balance, because it not only increases regulatory oversight, but it also empowers current regulators, because they don't lose the jurisdiction that they currently have. The SRO would actually work pursuant to delegated authority from those federal regulators. So it's more of a connective tissue, I would say, between the federal regulators and the industry. So it's really kind of a nice sort of middle ground. The other thing is, I think it's a very cost-effective approach, because obviously, this is something that the industry would play a role in funding, as opposed to having the SRO, like a federal regulator has to be funded through the federal appropriations process. So this is actually another huge advantage, given that the federal regulators do have budget constraints. So I think it's a great way to promote the highest standards of ethical trading and governance. And I think it can be a really positive thing. There's a lot of precedents for SROs. Obviously, on the security side, we have FINRA, there's the NFA on the future side. And all of this, like, it provides, I think, good public policy and a way to sort of increase the predictability for business. So they know, businesses know what the expectations are upfront. But then again, there are, consumer guardrails in place, and there's another sort of entity to go to for recourse in the event that things have gone wrong. And just to be clear, I would say that the two primary regulators that oversee the financial markets, obviously on the SEC and the CFTC, and the SRO would work in conjunction with both of those agencies and the other agencies as well. But certainly from a trading and markets perspective, I think those are probably the two main federal regulators. And the SRO would be subject to oversight by those federal agencies, and could also engage in an application process to have the federal agencies approve the SRO. So there are a whole host of ways where the SRO would work in conjunction with the federal agencies.
Just to push back on that a little bit, the crypto industry is facing threats of enforcement actions, potentially millions of dollars in fines, class action lawsuits, frauds and hacks that I think last year totaled around 14 billion. Given all of this, why do you think an SRO is the best approach? And part and parcel of that, why do you think other proposals are unworkable?
Yeah, so Kristen, this is a great question. I think the recent public policy proposals calling for an entirely new legal framework for digital assets, or an entirely new federal regulator, special licensing, some of these proposals like that we've seen, they all miss the mark. I think our capital markets here in the United States are really the envy of the world. And our existing laws, our market structure, our legal guideposts are a major reason for that. And I think it would be a mistake to discard this in favor of an entirely new bespoke regulatory regime for digital assets. I think a new federal regulator would be unworkable both politically and practically. I think such an approach would ask the SEC and the CFTC to both give up jurisdiction, and would treat digital assets unlike other asset classes. It would be costly for the federal government to maintain and sustain. Already, the federal financial regulators are understaffed and under budgeted. And we just saw not too long ago the creation of a new federal financial regulator, which was the CFPB. And we saw years of litigation surrounding the constitutionality of its establishment. It ended up with a Supreme Court decision. I think there's very little appetite in Washington to have, to see a similar experience, I would say, in the digital asset space for a digital asset market or digital asset regulator. So I think this is a nice way to sort of like break the digital asset public policy away from the Washington gridlock, and just like move a public policy framework ahead. So I think there are so many, different advantages that we could have with an SRO.
All right, I want to expand our lens a bit since we've mostly focused on the US, but countries around the world have taken different approaches to regulating digital assets. I'm curious whether any other countries have adopted a self-regulation model, and if so, how that approach is faring.
Yeah, so that is the case, in fact. And I wouldn't say that it's been widely adopted globally, but there are some very prominent jurisdictions where there are SROs. And I would say, one of the models here would be in Japan. So the JFSA, the Japan Financial Services Agency, which is the federal regulator, has given SRO designation to two different entities. One of them is on the securities token offering. It's a securities token offering association. So on the offering side, and then one is for virtual currency exchanges. So that's on the trading and market side. So, and both of them have been engaged in standard setting and principles. On the market side, the SRO recently actually put out, some leverage standards. So these are topics that are, like being covered in other areas of the world, certainly in Japan. We've also seen, and that was a real designation by the federal regulator. We've seen various associations pop up around the world in like the EU and India. And those associations are also similar, I would say, to Adam, where, these associations are really trying to instill market protections, and in areas where I would say where the federal regulators have yet to define like very clear rules. And like just as I stated earlier, I would say SROs are very well recognized in U.S. society, from everything from doctors to finance. So we have FINRA, we have the NFA. They oversee a wide swath of our financial markets. And there's really no reason why we shouldn't have one for this asset class as well.
Right, and the law as well. In our last few minutes, I'd like to get your response to some common criticisms of self-regulatory organizations. And I'll try to move through these somewhat quickly, sort of like a lightning round. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. All right. Criticism 1. Established SROs, such as the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, or FINRA, have been criticized for weak enforcement that caters to their members rather than the public they're supposed to serve, with some detractors comparing them to cartels. Your response? And you actually worked at FINRA, so you may have some unique insights here.
It's funny. I was just going to say, not only have I worked at FINRA, I also worked at the SEC. And like, just to be absolutely clear, I think SROs work in conjunction with the financial regulators as that connective tissue between the industry and the regulators. So an SRO is not the only line of defense, and it certainly does not take away any jurisdiction from the federal regulator. So when I was at FINRA, we routinely would make referrals to the SEC on cases. So if anything, I would say it increased the number of cases that were brought. And I also think from just like a disclosure and transparency perspective, SROs are responsible for mandating, additional disclosures for all of the organizations that are registered with them. So this step alone, I think, provides additional, protections. And in terms of enforcement, look, it's a constantly evolving science, and there would be additional disclosure, additional analysis, more cases. And I think that this is actually just all an advantage from a market integrity perspective.
All right, criticism 2, and I think you've touched on this a little, but I'll give you another opportunity to respond. An SRO wouldn't be able to adequately address what many see as the industry's biggest problems, fraud and serious legal violations that are the bread and butter of agencies like the SEC and the CFTC. A senior policy analyst for Americans for Financial Reform used this analogy: if there was an armed robbery going on, an SRO is outside giving the getaway car a parking ticket.
Yeah, so look, an SRO is an additional regulator. So I just want to really like hammer that point home, because this doesn't take the place of any regulator that we currently have. So I think if anything, there are more protections put in place. And I think a key tenet to having an SRO is that SRO gets to develop policy on emerging issues. And like I said, it serves as another vehicle for disclosures. One of the things that's I would say often not discussed is that the SROs that we have in the United States, and certainly a crypto SRO, would really provide a lot of expertise in unifying data monitoring for crypto markets on the fraud side, on the threat finance side. This is certainly a role that FINRA and NFA play. So I think that there would be better tracking, and you'd see more signs of illicit activity or fraudulent trading. And then in addition, the SRO would also be in a position to establish best practices, regulatory standards, and that provides more insight into the markets, and then further empowers the SEC, the CFTC, Treasury, FinCEN to more aptly police illegal activity. So I see this as a net positive for the markets.
Right. All right. Criticism number 3. Failure of a crypto self-regulatory organization could result in significant damage to investors and to the integrity of the markets. Your response?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a risk. I mean, anything can fail. I mean, our federal government could fail. In fact, like Congress's whole role in overseeing the federal regulators is to make sure that there aren't, big mishaps on the federal regulators watch. So given that the SRO would report and be overseen by the financial regulators, I think that the financial regulators would play that same role that Congress plays with them. At the same time, I would say the precedence here is not failure, it's success. I mean, when you look at, just where NASD was when it started and what FINRA has become, same thing on the NFA side. These are successes, and they've made our market stronger. So I think the precedent is really positive.
Okay, last one. SROs are less effective when they involve a large and heterogeneous group of participants, which, if you consider all of the assets and activities that could fall under the rubric of digital assets, arguably describes the crypto industry.
Yeah, so I love this question because I feel like the policy topics sort of on the securities derivatives side really coalesce around two topics. One is the token and the issuance of the token, sort of that primary issuance stage. And then the second part would be the exchange and the trading of markets and like the secondary markets kind of component. And I think, for the crypto industry, I think an SRO could help on both of those in both of those areas. But at the same time, I do think that, if you confine the SRO to those topics, I think that that's also helpful. So, for example, if the SRO is not really, covering banking issues or, or other issues like, BSA type issues that, FinCEN would cover, I think that's actually an advantage. And for the most part, I think that's how the existing SROs really do function. So I do think that you're right. It's important, for there to be sort of like a common theme between amongst the participants and the topics in which the SRO is engaged.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, Michelle. I applaud your efforts to tame the Wild West of crypto, and I look forward to seeing how all of this shakes out in the coming, I would like to say months, but more likely years. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristen. It's a pleasure to be here. It was fun chatting. Thanks so much. Take care.
You too.
Bye.